Ever seen a corn snake that looks like, like it's been painted with pastels?
Yeah, it's pretty wild, right?
It's the magic of the ultra gene, huh? You sent us some really great material on this, and, well, we're ready to take a deep dive into the genetics behind it with you. We've got excerpts from Understanding the Ultra Gene in Corn Snakes by Brian Leibscher. It's kind of like our roadmap for today.
It really is a fantastic resource.
So first things first, what exactly does this ultra gene do to a corn snake? Like, what's the visible change?
It's all about melanin, that pigment that gives us black coloration.
Right, right.
Well, unlike albinism, where there's no melanin at all.
Okay.
The ultra gene causes something we call hypomelanism. It basically dials back the amount of black pigment the snake produces, so you get a much softer black, less intense.
Interesting. So instead of that, I guess, stark black, you get like a kind of softer shade. What does that actually do to the snake's overall look?
You can think of it kind of like taking a photo and, you add a filter that reduces the darkness of the blacks. Well, it has the effect of letting those other colors, like the reds and yellows, really shine through. They almost glow because they're not competing with so much black anymore.
So it's like you're revealing these like hidden layers of color and making them more pronounced.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what gives these corn snakes that really unique pastel look.
This is so cool. Now, I'm guessing a snake doesn't just need one copy of this ultra gene to actually display these traits, right?
You're right. It's a little more complicated than that. See, the ultra gene is what we call recessive. So for a corn snake to actually show those ultra characteristics, it needs to inherit 2 copies of the gene.
Makes sense. One from each parent.
Exactly.
So we've got this gene making colors pop awesome. Now, the source mentions the ultra gene can actually interact with another gene called AML. I think it stands for amylistic, right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. And this sounds like where things can get really interesting.
Oh, absolutely. And it all boils down to where these genes are located. You see, ultra and amyl, they both occupy the same spot on a chromosome.
Huh.
We call that being allelic. And it basically means they can interact in these really unique ways.
So like 2 pieces of a puzzle that kind of fit together in a specific way to create a bigger picture.
That's a perfect way to put it. So when a corn snake inherits one ultra gene and one amyl gene, we get what's called an ultramel. Visually, it's this fascinating blend of the 2 genes' effects.
So the black pigment isn't totally gone, like in a true albino, but it's still significantly reduced.
Precisely. And it's that tiny bit of black pigment that remains that gives ultramels such a distinctive look. They're different from both ultra and male snakes.
Wow. And what about breeding? What happens when you breed ultramels?
Oh, that opens up a whole new set of possibilities. Depending on the other parent's genes, ultramels can actually produce offspring with all sorts of combinations, ultra, amyl, or even more ultramels.
That's incredible. I'm curious, though, is this ultra gene something that's been around in corn snakes for ages? Or is it a relatively recent discovery?
It's actually pretty recent. Unlike some genetic traits that we've known about for, centuries.
Right.
The ultra gene seems to have popped up in captive breeding programs more recently, like back in the late 20th century.
Wow, so no ancient myths or legends about these pastel-colored snakes.
Not that we know of. The origin of this mutation is still a bit of a mystery, actually. But once breeders saw what the ultra gene could do, the visual impact and all the potential for new color combinations, well, let's just say its popularity took off in the community.
Like uncovering a hidden treasure, and then suddenly, boom, there's this whole new world of possibilities.
That's a great way to put it.
Now that we've got a good grasp on the ultra gene itself, I'm really curious to learn more about those breeding implications you mentioned.
Well, that's exactly where we're headed next. We'll dive into how breeders are using this gene to achieve some truly remarkable results.
So we've got this gene, right, that can create these amazing pastel-like colors in corn snakes.
It's pretty incredible.
Well, we learned that it can interact with other genes in some really cool ways.
It can.
But what I'm really curious about is how breeders actually use this knowledge to create those breathtaking new corn snake morphs that the source talks about.
Oh, that's the really fun part. Think of it like an artist's palette, The ultra gene, that's like our base, that reduction in black pigment.
Yeah.
But then we can layer other genetic traits on top of that.
Oh.
Traits that affect color, pattern, even the scales themselves.
Okay, so how does that actually work in practice? Like if a breeder wants to create a new morph using the ultra gene, what are the steps they take?
Well, it all starts with selective breeding. Let's say you have a corn snake with the ultra gene, right?
Okay.
And then you have another one with a gene that causes, say, a striped pattern. If you breed those two snakes together, you're increasing the chances that some of their babies will inherit both the ultra gene and that striping gene.
So you could end up with a snake that not only has those softer, those pastel-like ultra colors, but also has stripes running down its body.
Exactly. And it goes way beyond just stripes, too. There are genes that can change the shade of red or add some orange or even change how the blotches are arranged. The combinations are, well, they're practically endless.
It sounds like genetic artistry almost.
It really is.
But I bet this kind of selective breeding comes with a lot of responsibility, too.
You're absolutely right. One of the biggest things we worry about is maintaining genetic diversity. See, if breeders get too focused on just one or two specific traits, the gene pool can start to get limited. And that can lead to some potential health problems down the line.
So it's not just about creating snakes that look really cool. It's also about making sure you're doing it in a way that's, ethical and sustainable for the species.
Exactly. Responsible breeders are very aware of that. They take steps to avoid inbreeding and make sure they're helping to keep these corn snakes healthy and resilient for the long term.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the ultra gene was actually discovered in these captive breeding programs.
Right.
Does this hypomelanism, does it give corn snakes any kind of advantage in the wild?
That's a great question. Hypomelanism in general, it can be both a good thing, a bad thing for wild animals.
I see.
Like, on the one hand, having less black pigment can actually help an animal blend in better, especially in certain environments.
Like how some animals are white to blend in with the snow.
Yeah, exactly like that. But on the other hand, melanin is actually really important for protecting skin from the sun.
Oh, right.
So, depending on where a snake lives, having less melanin could actually make it more likely to get sunburned.
So it's kind of a trade-off then.
It is. It really shows how complex nature can be. You can't always say if a trait is simply good or bad. It all depends on the environment and what challenges that particular animal faces.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, going back to the breeding programs, one of the most interesting things about the ultra gene is how it interacts with other genes to create all these different morphs. Can you give me an example of a morph that combines ultra with another gene to make a really striking look?
Sure. One great example is what we call the ultramel tessera. Now, you remember how the ultramel combines the ultra and mel genes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, tessera is another gene that affects the pattern on the snake's scales.
Okay.
It creates this sort of broken up checkerboard look.
So instead of having those smooth blotches of color, it's like more fragmented.
Exactly. So now imagine that tessera pattern, but with the ultramel's reduced black pigment and brighter colors. You end up with a snake that's just incredibly eye-catching. The colors really pop against that lighter background, and that fragmented pattern just adds a whole other level of, complexity to it.
Wow. I can only imagine how stunning that must be.
It really is something else, and that's just one example. Breeders are constantly playing with new combinations, always pushing the limits of what's possible.
It's amazing to think that it all started with this one gene.
Yeah.
This ultra gene that just tweaks the amount of black pigment.
Right.
And look at the ripple effect it's had.
It really goes to show you just how powerful and complex genetics can be. And that's what I think makes cornsnake breeding so captivating. It's like, it's like you're solving a puzzle, and each time you unlock a new part of their DNA, you reveal more of this hidden beauty.
Just like you're opening a door to this whole new world of possibilities.
Yeah.
Speaking of new worlds, the source mentions that the origin of the ultra gene is still a bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
What are some of the theories about how this mutation might have first appeared?
Well, the general thinking is that it was a spontaneous mutation, meaning it just happened randomly,
Yep.
within a captive breeding population.
Okay.
This kind of stuff actually happens all the time in nature, too, but it usually goes unnoticed.
Right, because if it doesn't give the animal some huge advantage or disadvantage, it's just not going to be that obvious.
Exactly. It could go on for generations without anyone even realizing it's there. But in a controlled environment like a breeding program, where people are really paying attention to these traits,
Yeah.
even subtle mutations like the ultra gene can be spotted and then, kind of nurtured.
So it's almost like by carefully breeding these snakes, people are able to zoom in on these tiny genetic changes and watch evolution unfold in a much more focused way.
That's a great way to put it. It really is this cool blend of science and art, where breeders are both observing shaping how these creatures evolve, though, of course, it's on a much, much smaller scale than natural selection.
It really makes you wonder what other genetic treasures might be out there. just waiting to be discovered.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what keeps breeders and researchers so fascinated by this stuff. There's always something new to learn, always another mystery to solve.
It's really incredible to think that just like reducing the amount of black pigment can lead to so many variations in corn snakes.
Oh, it is. It is. And as we've been talking about those responsible breeding practices, they really are so crucial to making sure these snakes stay healthy while we keep exploring those variations.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's fascinating how breeders are almost like artists, right?
Hmm.
Using genetics as their medium to create these living masterpieces.
It is a great analogy. There's a real art to it. It takes knowledge and intuition and a deep appreciation for for how complex these creatures' genetics are.
And it all started with this one discovery, this ultra gene.
Right.
I'm curious, for someone who's just learning about this for the first time, what would you say is the most important thing to understand about how the ultra gene works?
I think the key takeaway is that even tiny changes at the genetic level can have these huge effects on how an organism looks. Like the ultra gene doesn't actually create any new colors, right?
Okay.
It just changes how those existing pigments are expressed, basically by just reducing the black. But that one little change opens up so many possibilities for new color and pattern combos.
It's kind of like when you adjust one slider on a photo editor and like the whole picture changes.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. And that's what makes genetics so fascinating to me. It's this delicate dance of different factors where these small tweaks can sometimes lead to these dramatic and often really beautiful results.
So, for everyone listening, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've gone from the basics of hypomelanism all the way to how the ultra gene is used to create those incredible morphs, the ones you sent us information about. What about you? Is there anything that really surprised you about the ultra gene or, its impact on corn snake breeding?
For me, the most surprising thing is just the sheer number of morphs that breeders have developed, all starting from this one gene. It really speaks to their creativity and dedication, constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And it makes me think we're just scratching the surface of what we can do with genetics.
It really does make you wonder what other genetic secrets are out there, just waiting to be discovered. Not just in corn snakes, but across all kinds of animals.
Absolutely. Every species has its own unique genetic blueprint, and each time we learn something new, it gives us a deeper appreciation for just how diverse and complex life on Earth really is.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the ultra gene. It's been a fascinating journey. We hope you've all enjoyed it as much as we have. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.